The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome to this week's episode of the Lighting Controls Podcast. We have a fantastic guest for you today, but before we get into anything, I want to take this moment to remind you that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's also financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. And if you're listening to this on your favorite social website, you should check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com, where you can see other episodes, check out some news in the industry, or even buy some cool merch like what Ron and I are wearing today. But otherwise, let's get into it. Now, today we have a really cool guest, Maury. Maury, do you mind just giving us a quick breakdown on who you are and what you do?
Oh, well, my name is Maury Costantini. I've been in the industry for over 30 years, both lighting, HVAC controls, and mechanical. So I've worked for kind of half of my experiences on the mechanical contracting side, and the other half is working for controls companies. So I'm currently the vice president of sales for Dorse and Company.
Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. I think, this is one of those episodes where we're kind of taking a split out of our industry and jumping into other people's industries at the same time. But what's interesting is that, you have that background in lighting and lighting controls, so you can kind of see where the enmeshment happens between the two kinds of, or the three kinds of industries that you're kind of working in. And so from your perspective, what are you seeing in the lighting controls industry, and where do you think it's heading?
Well, I think it's it's interesting to think in terms of where it's come from. You think of the evolution of lighting, and I think the opportunities that are created in lighting control have been created by technology's advancements in lighting over the last few decades, where you went from a magnetic ballast to an electronic ballast, where you're controlling light levels using a ballast instead of the lamp, as an example. So as electronics allowed us to have more opportunities for different levels of lighting control, where you could then do lighting based not only on time of day scheduling and light sweeping, but you could then look at the windows with natural light. You can control lighting levels, and you could get a lot more information from the lighting system and have different levels of control by using the electronic ballast and T8. And then, LEDs first started, I remember, where it was just exits. And, I think what LED has done is created a whole new type of opportunity for lighting control, where you can control color, temperature, different ranges. It's the lighting quality is much better, and you start thinking in terms of if you want to sell a product or you want to create a better work environment, you are now able to do that through the advancements in lighting technology coupled with lighting control to really optimize the use of a space or improve retail sales and do these things that back in the 80s you just couldn't do, because you've got a dumb ballast with a lamp that really had poor color rendition and really wasn't capable of creating an environment that just was more conducive to the individual worker and didn't really do anything to advance productivity. It's just kind of just kind of light washing the space, and that was really it. Where now I think it's evolved to a point where there's all kinds of new creative ways that you can leverage it to change the indoor environment. And then I think, as far as I think potential, kind of looking at the other systems that operate within a building, I think historically the HVAC has always kind of been the lead in your building control architecture. But when you look at the way that HVAC systems are built, they don't give you as big of a representation of the indoor environment in a
Hmm.
commercial space, for example, that lighting does. So I think of just occupancy and then how you can vary systems that are functioning within a space, maybe looking as lighting the lead instead of the HVAC as the lead. So if you want to get to net zero buildings, which is kind of the trend, I think the fact that the breadth of the lighting control infrastructure is going to allow you to optimize spaces to really ratchet down uh, the energy consumption within commercial
Hmm.
spaces and potentially also improve the conditions for the individual worker, whether it's improving indoor air quality or providing different types of lighting color and levels and those kinds of things to kind of optimize to the individual occupant.
Now, you were talking about HVAC, and what was interesting was you said something about how you don't have as much visibility with the building. And so I'm curious if you could just expand upon that a little bit more, because a lot of our listeners don't really spend a lot of time dealing with HVAC systems. They're more dealing with lighting and lighting controls.
So HVAC is zoned. So,
Hmm.
like if you have a perimeter zone, you have one thermostat in one location out of maybe 4 offices, but you probably
Hmm.
have lighting control in every single office.
Right.
And yeah, so so now again, it's just as technology advances, and instead of having this sort of price point limitation on how you can build HVACs, now there actually are like Titus, for example, makes a solar diffuser that has an actuator within it that you can
Hmm.
modulate to actually reduce or increase airflow for that individual space. So if the lighting control, like I said, was in the lead and they knew that that space was occupied because the control is telling them that, that would then feed the HVAC system information to optimize that indoor environment for the occupied space as part of time of, just the time of day occupied unoccupied scheduling, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, looking at the historical format with HVAC systems that aren't integrated with a lighting control system, it's kind of like having an aux sensor for 4 offices. And if one of those offices is occupied, all 4 offices are on. And that's kind of the same form factor for your
Mm-hmm.
HVAC system in its traditional format, where you'd just have that whole zone is 4 offices. Whereas if you tap into the lighting controls, because you have to have occupancy or vacancy sensors in each of those offices, then
Mm-hmm.
you're really expanding the capabilities of that HVAC system instead of just embracing a limitation that it has. And so, to your point, you can really squeeze more energy savings out of that system by coordinating the two HVAC and lighting control systems.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have some type of application that's created for the individual user that's either tied to their network for their laptop or PC, or even if it's a mobile app where they can control temperature set points or those kinds of things when they're occupied for their unique environment, the lighting sensor says, "Boom, somebody's in the space." It tells the HVAC system to ramp up to what other settings are for their set points,
Hmm.
and it just gives more precise control. I mean, I'm sure you've heard many times that people are uncomfortable in their offices, but nobody really
Yes.
thinks of, how do we create that precision by leveraging lighting. I
Hmm.
think it's still something that hasn't
Mm.
fully taken root, but I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
potential.
No, and I agree, and I feel like we've been here before in the industry where HVAC and lighting controls are so easy to put into lockstep, and yet there's this resistance from external forces to adopt this level of integration. And I was curious if you had any theories on why that is.
I think part of it's history. So the way that control systems evolved were pneumatic. So pneumatic would fall into mechanical,
Mhm.
where you
Hmm.
have all the other systems fall into electrical. So you get lighting controls, you get life safety, access control, and security are all fall under that umbrella. Well, now with again technology advanced, but the way that it's procured and managed as a system hasn't. So you still have this separation that's created
Yeah.
in just how projects are designed and built. So it's just kind of a challenge that we haven't been able to change.
No, and I would agree with that. I think that that's kind of where a lot of people find frustration and challenge with system design is the fact that it's so siloed between, for instance, if you're looking at CSI format, Division 26 and Division 23. It's like, okay, you've got your electrical divisions and all the electrical trades are going to do this, and you've got your mechanical division and all the mechanical divisions are going to do that, but they're never going to like come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there in Seattle where I'm at, it happens to be a pretty strong design build market for Western Washington. There's other markets like that, California and in the LA, San Francisco area. You would think the specialty contractors tend to be the ones that are part of that design build package with the general contractor that they could do a better job collaborating and with, as just sort of BIM coordination and all these things that promote, active participation by the trades, that we could overcome that. But it's still, even with all that, evolution, there's still some resistance and some of it just comes down to dollars and cents, right? So the installing contractors, it's a lucrative business servicing controls. So there's just companies, they don't want to give that up. And there's a lot of mechanicals that do controls. So,
Right.
there's a lot of things going on.
And I get the feeling that mechanical has a different format than electrical when it comes to that kind of approach to control systems. As it pertains to integrators, for instance, with a mechanical system, it's almost an assumption that you're going to have an integrator involved because of the way that the mechanical systems operate and the fact that they typically use an open protocol. Whereas in lighting controls, you end up with a manufacturer-specific system that has a technician, a startup technician for that manufacturer, as opposed to an integrator. And so instead of having somebody who's an intermediary between those two systems, you have somebody who's rigidly adhering to one manufacturer's needs. And they are almost on contract saying you can't work on other people's equipment because then that gives us ownership over stuff we didn't sell.
Well, everyone's invested in that, like I said, because of the service business. So,
right. But I think there's a lot more systems integrators out there for mechanical than there are for electrical.
Oh, absolutely. Well, like I was saying, really, people have looked to the mechanical HVAC as the kind of global company, right? With the hierarchy, and frankly, I think where the industry is going to end up is it's going to be more like lighting, where it's more of a factory configured package that's more plug and play is where it needs to go. And if the big powerhouses don't do it, Microsoft, Google, companies like that, they very well do it for them.
Interesting. So you're seeing that proprietary may come in and take that open and convert it into their own proprietary. So instead of lighting controls going more open protocol, HVAC or mechanical may go more proprietary.
I don't know if it's proprietary. I would argue that it's not. It's not just because it's a manufacturer configured. Everything's kind of been driven to BACnet. It is definitely taken the lead. Line's been squeezed out. Modbus has made a little bit of a comeback, but unless you're more of an industrial setting, but just looking in general at the commercial market, this push for openness and interoperability exists. The reason I say that, the potential is that if somebody comes in, disrupts the market, and just makes it so that it's all plug and play, so that all manufacturers of lighting controls and life safety products and access control and HVAC controls, just like in computing, can all communicate one to the other without limitations. I mean, could you imagine if everybody had their own email protocol or email plugins, or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
people
No, no,
people do
I
it for economic reasons, but eventually some people that aren't invested in that are going to disrupt the market.
Sure. No, I must have misheard you because I thought you were talking about the mechanical side, but you're right. With the lighting control side, it almost seems like it's fertile ground for somebody to come in and change, it to be an open standard and just provide all of this, easy and compatible system so that it is plug and play, like you said. I think that the challenge there, and I'm seeing a lot of like ecosystems is what people are referring to them as, cropping up, where it's like we ascribe to an ocean ecosystem, or we ascribe to the Bluetooth SIG ecosystem, but it doesn't seem like there's any consensus over protocol or form factor yet when it comes to those systems. It seems like it's still emerging over time, and maybe we'll see like Google come out with a Matter that's specific to lighting controls, but it seems as though there's still some kind of resistance to adoption widespread for these sort of open ecosystems.
Well, I mean, you think of tritium. That's multi-protocol. I mean, back in the day, I mean, you didn't have soft applications. Everything was, you had to buy a global control device that had kind of a unique way of communicating with protocol, and then trying to find ways to cross communicate. Nowadays, because of the advancements of technologies, you can have a device that may have different, form factors, as you say, or that can translate one to the other, normalize data across those platforms. But it just, I mean, I look at what's going on in HVAC now, and it's kind of this futile exercise with common naming conventions, for example, for point naming. I mean, it's just all it's a head fake, and I feel like you use your standard computer architecture and how there's naming conventions, and you can do addressing and all these other things. We're making it far more complicated, but we're doing it deliberately because everybody wants to live in their own little sandbox, as you say, right? So everyone thinks by trying to be protective. I think if you're not willing to engage in that in the future, you're going to just become obsolete. And the tech companies are coming. I mean, you see ads for Microsoft and IBM, and they're coming because they see.
Well, and
you know.
I think what's interesting is that's another thing that I feel like in North America, anyways, we've been here before, where bigger companies are gonna be gunning for lighting controls, and they flame out. And I look at the big BMS systems that have cycled through different control solutions and just come up empty in North America. And I feel as though there's something in our industry here that just doesn't allow for that to happen for some reason, because either because of the siloed process for our trades, or because people are just resistant to integration. But I'm curious if it's going to go the same direction, or if Google or Apple or some other bigger group is going to be able to come in and actually shake up the industry.
Well, I mean, you've got a enormous built environment, and you think about twisted pair communication and some of the old stuff that's in buildings. So a lot of property managers or building owners aren't eager to advance that in that technology. But I think in the new built environment, that's where we're going to see it take hold first, obviously, and gain momentum. And then I think this, again, Washington State, the West Coast, I think states like New York, I mean, are really embracing very, very aggressive, zero or net zero buildings, and you got the 2030 districts and all these initiatives to drive and change behavior. And Seattle's talking about a carbon tax and all these things that are gonna, so they're where it's always been a carrot, they're definitely starting to a stick. And
Yep.
I think it's
Yeah.
going to create a different economic conversation that will also affect the built environment over time. So people are going to be forced to, invest in their technology infrastructure for benchmarking and optimizing
Mhm.
the performance of their buildings. So it's coming. It will take a while because, I mean, you look at the percentage of projects that a typical company is dealing with, and it might be 5-10% new, and then the rest of it's service or tenant improvements or working on existing infrastructure,
Mhm.
or doing software updates and that kind of stuff.
Totally. Well, and I kind of want to probe Ron about this because Ron does a lot of integration work as well. And when it comes to carrot versus stick, do you see the stick being a bigger motivator than the carrot?
I mean, the stick could easily be the stick will be a bigger motivator than the carrot, right? It's
Sure.
right now the carrot's there, it's dangling, and some incentives are changing, but ultimately the stick is coming, right? I mean, we heard that even
Mhm.
during Light Fair with everything with
Right.
EV and electrification. The stick is
Mm-hmm.
coming. It's just a matter of who brings it first.
Right. Well, who brings a solution to the stick?
Well, and who brings the stick first? Is the stick coming from the power
Yeah, that's
company?
fair.
Is the stick
Yeah.
come right? Where's the stick coming from? So,
Yeah, well, we have legislation in Washington State that's creating the stick. So
Yeah.
and you think about it. So I was at a conference yesterday, and the fact that they're going to zero gas for commercial buildings in July.
Hmm.
So, and some of that's going to affect
Yeah, I heard
existing
about
building
that.
infrastructure. Yeah. So you think, you know, back when I started in this industry, did a lot of performance contractings, and lighting and lighting control were like the big things to do because they had the biggest bang for the buck. And that's probably still the same opportunity. And what will happen is they're going to say you've got to get rid of your gas pack, you got to go to a heat pump, and all of a sudden they're taking on all this extra load
yeah.
on the electrical side. So
Yeah.
look at the lighting infrastructure and electrical infrastructure, and see if you can find a way to reduce your total load so that you don't have to uh, put in a whole new transformer and infrastructure in your building. Seattle City Lights already 18 to 24 months out on transformers. So
Wow.
it would be hugely disruptive
Hmm.
to a
Right.
building if they
To
were
have to
required
add.
to make this change. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we've always talked about in at least in the conservation side that conservation is that extra utility. So by doing reduction and doing some
Hmm.
of the things that I've mentioned, where you're having more precise control and using lighting control as providing more insight and more tighter control of your building and reducing the overall load, you could potentially offset not only the operational cost and electrical load of the new equipment, but also the size of that equipment.
Right.
It's just it's something that's going to have to be dealt with.
No, and this is along the lines of a presentation that I did with a couple of colleagues of mine at Light Fair, where we kind of tried to coin the term electrification offset, where it's exactly what you're talking about, where you create an intelligent system to reduce demand in the building to compensate for the items that are getting electrified. So in your case, it's going from gas to electricity in your heating and cooling, whereas what we were using as a model was EV car charging. But it's all the same.
Mhm.
If your whole building is 100% electrical and it's not a net zero building, then you need to either offset that load that you're adding to it, or you need to expand the infrastructure to feed that building. And the infrastructure, time wise, is a bad thing. Cost wise, could be worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, so I mean, to your point, these are the changing factors in our industry that we haven't really had to deal with in the past. It
Mhm.
used to be that going fluorescent to LED was sufficient enough for you to go, okay, yeah, I've got enough capacity in my infrastructure feeding this building. Whereas nowadays, that's probably not even a drop in the pan. You're probably looking at needing to offset a lot more than just going from fluorescent to LED. And so if you have a system that's dynamic enough and can respond to the needs of the occupants as well as the needs of the systems, then you might be able to facilitate an offset that allows the current infrastructure to continue to feed the building.
Yeah, and their lighting has far more potential than HVAC control, in my opinion.
Right. Well, because to your point, it's about visibility in the building. Having an aux sensor in every single room, and if those occupancy sensors are all networked, then you've immediately got yourself an intelligent enough system to at least see what's going on. Now, the next step is to make sure that the networked lighting control system has the ability to do conditional logic, which is saying, well, if there are people in here and the energy load is above X, then I need to do Y to reduce load.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, as far as a building management or building automation system like a BACnet server, that's pretty part and parcel for what's in there. It just means that you need somebody who knows how to do BACnet programming to be able to do that.
Yeah,
is BACnet the best solution, though, moving forward, right? As we start integrating more and more of these systems, is BACnet the best solution?
Oh, I would argue it's probably not ideal. I mean, I've never been but it's open, right? It was created by the engineering community, and it was kind of a knee-jerk reaction to LAN. It was kind of the first mover, and charged a lot for the licensing, and that really created BACnet. BACnet has a lot of limitations. I mean, even the way that the works, I mean, it has to be done very specifically with daisy chaining. It uses packets. I mean, LAN was great because you could tunnel and do bindings and all these things with it that BACnet doesn't have. That it's a bunch of metadata rolling down a pipe, and then it's just not as efficient. So and I still deal with BACnet issues with collisions or communication drops and other things that happen, because it's kind of a fragile network. And you think of MSTP as far outlived its usefulness, but it's just something everybody's got accustomed to, even though IPs have been around for a while. So it's just people don't want to. I don't know if it's just an education thing or they don't want to spend the money for the infrastructure, but definitely you want. I mean, at the end of the day, there needs to be an IP solution to make it a more durable system with more capability for across networks to communicate with all kinds of devices. I mean, I'm sure there's things that are going to be used in buildings in the future we haven't even thought of. But it's just I mean, renewables is one thing that comes to mind, and then just the fact of lighting your lighting load being connected with your HVAC load to look at your what's out on the power grid, and all the peak demand limiting that we've done some of that in the past, but it's just all going to be integrated where you can just when you need to can squeeze out and kind of balance that ebb and flow of all the dynamics that are going on in and out of the building. It's just going to have more and more demand on it, and who knows what AI is going to do.
Right. Well, and it seems like AI might be a helping hand in this when it comes to identifying ways to reduce demand. If there's an intelligence monitoring everything and going, okay, if it's 6 o'clock in the morning and one person enters the room, probably there's going to be a rush of people entering that room after that person. So I'm going to adjust to compensate for that. Whereas if it's 9 o'clock at night and somebody's just doing a security sweep of the building, then it's going to be like, okay, well, I'm just going to turn off all the lights right after that person walks through. And so that kind of processing could really help expedite energy savings. But to your point, it may also put in new demands. So we may have huge processors in buildings that have huge power demands to be able to work that level of intelligence.
Yeah, I think the potential with AI. We've done a lot of data warehousing. I mean, you think of all the trending that's done for all control systems that I don't think we really fully leveraged. But if you just kind of a dynamic intelligence that could look at that as you're saying. I mean, like real, what's the occupancy of an office on a typical day, and then the system kind of optimizes the systems that support the occupant that is only there 4 hours a day. That's what I was saying, to squeeze out every bit of energy, but then when they're in that space, have the ability to have different colors or different light levels, or or temperature that suits that individual to make them the most successful, most productive person that they can possibly be. So the more analysis we can do with all the massive amounts of data that we're collecting, I think the more efficient the buildings will become, and the more productive people will become.
No, I completely agree. Now, you mentioned something earlier on, which was that BACnet is not the perfect protocol, and I would make the argument that there is no such thing as a perfect protocol. I mean, if Ron,
That's
if I asked
probably
you,
true.
is DMX the perfect protocol?
I mean, no, it's not.
But you work with it every single day.
I do, yes. But can it do everything?
So,
no.
right, exactly. And so I think, as far as finding the perfect, protocol or communication language, I would say that that's a red herring. You're really not going to find it out there. But what was interesting is you said IP is really the way to go, which is Internet Protocol.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was curious if you could expound upon that a little bit more about why you think IP is the way of the future.
Well, I just think it's just the speed and capacity for communication is really the only reason for it, right? I mean, it's more of a scalable infrastructure than the old MSTP, twisted pair, that kind of communication. It just, I mean, we see that with everything, right? I mean, just how telecom has evolved, and other things, and IP is still used by a lot of product platforms, and but it just needs to be the standard, I think.
Interesting. And I know a number of power over Ethernet people who would agree with you, because basically if you give an IP address to every single device in your system, and you power everything with PoE, then you've simplified everything down to a low voltage power, as well as sharing the same data line. And to a degree, there's also other protocols out there that use IP addressing in their form factors. So I think, to your point, it is kind of the way of the future. It's just a question of which form factor are we going to end up with when it comes to IP.
Yeah. Well, I think with everything shrinking, you could almost make each controller its own computer. That could do a lot more independent processing and just do more on more of it, a network that might be sending back information for analysis and trending and that kind of stuff that you need for somebody that's doing maintenance or whatever that wants information on the building. But security was always an issue. I don't think that, again, that could be solvable just because of things have shrunk. Technology shrunk, and you can fit a whole lot of computing power in a small space.
And there's also good ways of making sure that you have the security. I mean, the days of, we were talking to somebody about this recently, where the days of having your thermostat be the weak link in your casino and having all of the money stolen out of the coffers that way they're really gone. It's not the same way anymore. So, I think as far as IP security goes, you just need to follow the right procedures and make sure you're coordinating with the right people to achieve that. But I think having that mindset of your occupancy sensor is not just an occupancy sensor, it's actually a full processor. It has
Mm-hmm.
more information and capability, is an interesting way of looking at it, because I would say that a lot of the way that our industry looks at lighting control systems right now is that an occupancy sensor is just a remote device. It's not smart enough to make any decisions on its own.
Well, think of instead of having that and looking at every office as an end device, think of it having like a room control. And it might not just be lighting; it might be other systems that reside in that space that have, like I was saying earlier, with that occupant has more control, or they've got more ability to program functionality within an individual space, from a conference room, from an office to a data room, and functionally everything that resides in that zone or space can be programmed independent, maybe of the instead of as a system, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, like in Europe, a lot of it they build their architecture differently, where it is more of a room by room full control,
Yeah.
where it's multiple systems. Where here, I think, like I was talking about earlier, just the way that we've kind of done it over the years, we've kind of segmented it and have really limited our ability to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see that change finally, right? I mean, and you're right, that was that way for a long time, and we're still installing systems in that manner. But we are starting to see a lot more distributed control and a lot more distributed systems that are still networked, right? But each space is distributed and has control over its own space. And I think there's something to be said, especially for new construction, going back to the idea of everything being IP, is that you can work with the building or the owner's IT team. Let them provide all the network switches, all the management, all the VLANs, and then each trade just drops their equipment onto the network in the appropriate ports. And then no one has to manage their own properties, right? We let IT manage everything. And so from a new construction standpoint, there's a lot to be said for moving forward in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I always joke with people, could you imagine if you had somebody come in and program your laptop for Excel? You know, it's just it's so backward thinking, and what you're describing is exactly that's why I think that I don't think we'll be able to get past ourselves, that it's the IBM that's going to do what you're describing, probably not Siemens or Johnson Controls, or any one of the Philips, or any one of the big controls manufacturers. So it's just it's going to take time, but I think that's the way it's going to go.
Well, and I think it's really going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years because of that, and whether there's going to be more ready adoption within our industry, because I think you're right. People who don't pivot with this are going to get completely bowled over, and we may see, other groups that are unrelated to our industry coming in and scooping up lighting and lighting controls and saying, oh, well, this is what it is now. And that may be for better or worse. I mean, I feel like it would be for worse, because, anytime somebody comes in and disrupts an industry that they're not even a part of, there's usually a lot of growing pains with that kind of approach.
Well, I think you see a lot of private labeling that goes on within the industries, and I think we almost might allow it to happen. I mean, if you can use right players in the market would end up partnering with tech companies, they may find themselves being acquired, or that technology being acquired as part of their overall business, where it's more of a dynamic aggregation of the different types of despot technologies, and pulling them together under that the platform that we're talking about. And it's it's everything from window shades and and lighting and HVAC and access control and all these things are kind of packaged together under one platform and seamless and doesn't require the level of service and support that I think that's inherent in lighting controls, HVAC controls, security. It just will become part of the IT backbone and infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I think that, that's a very strong possibility. And so it'll be a question of what a lighting controls designer or lighting designer does in tandem with that workflow to be able to achieve what they're trying to design for a building.
Well, I think the way things are, I think that probably plays to them, because you think of the electrical trades, that umbrella, that would all fall under the same umbrella. I think the loser in it would be probably the HVAC controls contractor / integrator, where they would just be kind of almost cut out of it, and everything would go under one discipline, because it doesn't require any kind of sophistication. I mean, we've seen over time how mechanical equipment has become simpler to connect with. There's soft applications, or it's just a simple terminal strip to get them to function, and then they just kind of run, right? It's packaged controls, everything just kind of runs. So if through the IT infrastructure, where you've got electrical installers building that whole infrastructure, and then you've got the manufacturers, kind of building the hardware that attaches to it, that could all be designed by the same designer.
It really could be. And it's funny, it's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with people, and I guess I look at it slightly differently. You see it as HVAC is going to fall under lighting, and I've been looking at it potentially the other way, that mechanical was going to take over lighting controls. And I was looking at it purely from a dashboard point of view. Most of the HVAC dashboards are far more elegant and easier to use for end users than lighting dashboards. So I've been looking at this from my perspective of the right HVAC company, the right mechanical company is going to come in, and they're going to say, okay, well, we're going to take over the lighting controls too. And we're going to take over these sensors, and we're going to integrate everything in with us, and we're going to integrate it under our dashboard. And the lighting is still going to be provided by somebody else, but we're going to integrate it in with us. So I've been looking at it potentially going a different way. So it's interesting that you see it in the inverse. I don't think you're wrong. I just hadn't considered it.
Well, and I think what's... Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you get again, if you have more computing horsepower within the individual spaces, and you can give people an opportunity to see, like you talk about dashboards. So if I've got my office and I've got my own environment, and I've got my dashboard that tells me how much I'm using, how many trees I've saved, or what, the impact that I'm personally having on the environment. I mean, there's all kinds of cool things you could do by creating that kind of infrastructure that you don't necessarily gain from HVAC. And having, lived in the HVAC world, a lot of HVAC controls folks kind of shy away from lighting control. And I just think it needs to continue to evolve, where you don't have proprietary plug-in tools, and you've got the ability for the HVAC hardware to communicate, as well as lighting and access control, which has its own XML and all this other stuff that goes on with that. That's different. It's got to come together.
Well, I'm curious.
But it's going to,
I'm curious, because you said, HVAC people shy away from lighting controls. And do you have any thoughts on why that is?
I think they understand it, and then it's just a matter of making sure that you can map, do all the point mapping, and making sure that you're communicating. But really, a lot of it's just receiving inputs like occupancy inputs to do occupied, unoccupied resets and that kind of stuff, demand control, ventilation, these kinds of things, leveraging the lightings that way, and then maybe some time of day scheduling. But to really trying to understand just different temperatures and how to improve occupant comfort or productivity and those kinds of things. It's just not their strength.
So yeah, I mean, from a perspective of HVAC versus lighting controls are much more complex in what the programming expectations are.
Absolutely, because you can send an enable to an air handler and it just does its thing because the manufacturer's told it what to do. And you might have a few set points that you're capturing, like discharge air or static pressure and those kinds of things. But the number of variables in lighting control far exceed HVAC.
Mm-hmm. And I would say also the expectation of speedy response is different too. If I go up to a thermostat and I start changing the temperature, I'm not going to expect my room to be immediately that temperature. Whereas if I go over and I hit a light switch, I'm going to expect an immediate response from my lighting in that space.
Well, and I think also the occupant has a better understanding of lighting. And as you say, that immediate response. I mean, they know if a light's flickering or if it's dim in the office or the lights go on and off. I mean, it's an immediate response. I mean, they get it, they understand it. It affects them every day more so than an HVAC system that they can't see other than a diffuser in the ceiling.
Right.
Lighting is far more impactful, and I think the opportunity with lighting, like I was saying, with different individual settings and all these things that could be done with it, to give people more flexibility. I don't think it necessarily requires reinventing the infrastructure a whole lot. It's just continuing the advancements in lighting technology to afford an opportunity to have better lighting control. And with LEDs, it gives you such a great range of what you could potentially do.
Well, and I'm kind of sold on this perspective that you have, which is that, lighting controls is much better poised to take over HVAC than HVAC is to take over lighting. So, I also was in the same mindset that Ron had, which was that, eventually HVAC is just going to come in and take over lighting. But I think you're right. There is more flexibility and complexity within a lighting control system, and therefore it has a more easy pivot to take that on, so long as we have people who can actually program in the protocol that the system is utilizing. I think if you talk to lighting controls people about BACnet, their eyes roll up into the back of their head because they don't know what you're talking about. And it's because it's a much more complex protocol and it requires a lot more programming and maintenance. But
it shouldn't.
To your point, it shouldn't. You're right. Yeah, it should be a lot easier to manage.
Yeah.
And so, I think if we can find that sweet spot of easy programming BACnet IP and integrators in the lighting world who want to take on the HVAC scope, we've got a winning situation right there.
Yeah. No, I think it's an opportunity. I think there's a necessity, at least in the near term, for the trades to work more closely together, and for designers to be more thoughtful and how they can leverage one with the other. And I mean, I've been through a lot of BIM coordination meetings in my time, and we aspire to have that level of coordination for the benefit of the owner and what's required by energy codes and those kinds of things. But it's still evolving.
Yeah, I would agree. Well, we're almost out of time here, so I'm just going to wrap up a little bit of what we've talked about here. I think we've gone around a lot of interesting topics here, and hopefully our listeners got a lot out of it. But what's really interesting is you're really kind of at this crux between the two worlds of mechanical and lighting, which I would say has existed for a long time as it is.
Mhm.
And we're now seeing not just incentive, but punishment for people who avoid kind of adopting better integration with their buildings. So what you're seeing is on both sides of that crux that there's a sort of a migrating to the center, but from your perspective, lighting controls is actually in a better position to be controlling mechanical stuff, because mechanical stuff is a lot simpler, but also because it's an open standard, so it's a lot easier to go in and control the HVAC or things, as well as if you kind of combine lighting controls and HVAC, you're actually expanding what would have otherwise been a more limited design for your HVAC system because of the way that HVAC has traditionally been zoned. So if you can leverage a networked lighting control system with a dynamic reasoning process, conditional logic, you can really take advantage of that and reduce your energy footprint, as well as you might even be able to offer future electrification, such as converting your HVAC to electrical from gas or oil or whatever non-electrical format you have there. So there's really a great boon to whoever manages to adopt this mindset soon, because it's coming, it's happening. And so if you are, for instance, an integrator that is in the HVAC world or the lighting world, and you reach across the aisle and grab information and training of the other side, you're going to be in a really good position to facilitate future integrations, especially with new building. Retrofit, we're probably going to see that eventually, but with new construction, that's really the important part, because of the restrictions that energy codes and municipalities are enforcing. So it's no longer a carrot incentive, it's a stick punishment for you to not do this. And do you want to pay those fees, those fines? Probably not. So building owners are going to feel a need to do this, and so they're going to be reaching out for people like that. And so whoever has the ability to say, yeah, I can do this, is going to get that job.
Yeah, I think it'll be probably another decade before it all kind of plays out. But I think that's a good way of summarizing it, and I think that's where we're gonna wind eventually. Is that I don't necessarily look at it as HVAC taking over controls or lighting controls taking over HVAC, but I think you summed it up well. It's the integrators and dynamic thinkers that are going to look at a whole building and try to really truly optimize and improve performance. Whether it's a carrot or stick, and those are the winners.
Right. It's whoever has the skill set needed to make it happen. Mm-hmm. So, well, Maury, really appreciate you taking the time. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll have you back, maybe in a few years when we start seeing some pivoting happening and some of this that we're predicting happen. But thank you so much.
Yeah, truly my pleasure. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I just want to take this moment to remind everyone that today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association. And I just want to thank Maury again for a fantastic conversation and helping me to sort of pivot my own mindset a little bit here and make me think a little bit more critically about some of my ideas and where I thought the industry was going. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, maybe you'll start doing some backnet training in-house. But also, this episode is financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. And again, check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com, for all of our episodes that we've had up to this point. as well as check out for any industry news. We have a news feed that goes on all the time, and maybe check out some merch, support the podcast. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here. And Maury, thank you for a great conversation.